Live here again, and this is my 3 o'clock Thursday, September 8th, just sort of informal talk on practices related to collaborative teaching and learning. So for teachers who are interested in collaborative learning, there was a link on my LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram, where you can log in and visit the space that you're looking at right here. And I've shown this space before, but this is usually where people start, in this little foyer with little introductions. Kind of helps you see how this system works, see how the space works, lots of things to interact with. But we're not here just to play around and have fun with this space. So let's enter. When you get in here, just go ahead and use your arrow keys on your keyboard to enter the space. So when you get here, there's a lot of things to look at, but ultimately what we're here to do is go straight to this table where we're going to discuss ways to collaborate. And for anybody that does come on in, you are going to be able to join the group and share your video and be able to talk simultaneously with me and anyone else that's in this group. And when you click X, when this little book lights up, and every book lights up, you can press X to interact, and they all go to the exact same interactive whiteboard. So when you get in here and you click X, and you should be able to see the board. Let's hope this works. And it works. Perfect. So for those that do end up coming in during this, whatever this is, this talk, that's kind of how you get to here. And for those that come later, just to kind of check out what's actually here, you can do that. You can access this virtual space anytime you would like. So I'm going to zoom in here. This Miro space, I can use my my mouse, the wheel on my mouse, to zoom in and out. I can also use the plus and minus keys to zoom out and in. And right-click to move the board around and take a look and see everything that's here. So we're going to be talking about the topic is collaborative learning practices. I'm going to be looking at two particular sources, two particular articles. And what I'm going to be looking at first is this 2018 study that looked at collaborative learning practices, specifically perceived obstacles to effective student collaboration in the classrooms. So this is really just kind of celebrating the problem, and a lot of teachers are already going to know what these obstacles are. So, if you're here just to get the practices that'll fix your classroom, there are some suggestions and there are some practices in the second article. And so when you look at the second article, when I get to it, it's not new. It's actually good, solid advice from 1988. Collaborative learning is not new. So when new teachers are continually needing to revisit these kinds of practices because they're not the focal point of teacher training programs, unfortunately. So that's a different conversation. But these are the two articles I'm going to be looking at. For sake of time, we can't get into all of the different things. And so going over some of the obstacles and then giving some examples specific to the writing process on how to improve collaborative learning in the classroom, we can sort of prime this conversation for more specific conversations about what's happening in a specific classroom with a particular teacher and the dynamics of their classroom and their students. Every classroom's different. Every classroom has a personality that's produced from the teacher and the students and the particular dynamics that's involved. So let's jump in here. Let's look at the teacher's concerns first. In this study, they highlight how the teacher's concerns across dozens, almost hundreds of teachers, they all agree that some of the hardest things to do with collaborative learning has to do with struggling to monitor student on-task behaviors, being able to really keep track of every single student and how they're working collaboratively. Instead of the whole class direct instruction where the students are doing everything that you are telling them to do, you can then just keep an eye out for students who are not doing the thing you're telling them to do. It's easier to monitor. But when students are learning how to collaborate, it's harder to monitor all the students. So that's one good observation that teachers have made that this study highlights. The next one here is, and for those of you that do come in, if you do happen to agree and you click on the post-it here, you can actually interact with this and say add emoji, and go ahead and give it a thumbs up if you agree that's one of the obstacles. And it'll count how many thumbs up or thumbs down or any kinds of emojis that this comment gets. So you can come in after the fact and interact with these ideas. So here we have the next teacher concern. Teachers struggle to manage group work time. Group work time. The actual students, the amount of time that they are working in a group. Teachers struggle to manage the students' group work time. And I think that's a really important, I'm really breaking that down, because if it's a truly collaborative environment for learning, then the teachers aren't managing the students' time. The students are being coached on how to manage their own time. That's a really important piece to be self-aware of, because when teachers, are in 2018 and the years leading up to it, teachers are saying that, it's hard to manage group work time. It's because the teachers are trying to manage all the students' work. They're trying to apply a direct instruction approach to collaborative learning in the classroom. And so they get themselves, and so it's a struggle. So that, again, that's a very common concern that definitely sparks conversation. The third one here, teachers struggle to provide relevant materials and assign roles. Yeah, I can totally see how that would be a common obstacle for teachers, because, depending on what materials you have, you might not have materials that are best for collaborative learning. And so I would say that's just more of the process of improving a collaborative learning environment. But the assigning roles, a lot of collaborative learning plans have student roles that the teachers assign. And I would argue that it's more important that perhaps at the beginning that you are giving students an opportunity by assigning roles to figure out how a group can work together collaboratively by sharing and, basically passing out the responsibility, sharing the responsibility by giving different students different things to do. That's fine. But ultimately, the goal is that the students understand the roles well enough that they can assign those roles amongst themselves. So that's, again, going back to this desire, this teachers want to apply direct instruction approaches to collaborative learning. The teachers struggle to establish teamwork beliefs. That's another good one. We're actually going to talk about that one a little bit more later. This next teacher concern, teachers struggle to determine group norms for collaboration, and I think that's really important, because when it comes to the students' concerns, and you're talking about group norms for collaboration, well, from the students' perspective, it seems the students are often interrupting each other. And as a classroom teacher in middle school and upper elementary, there's a lot of interruptions that are happening, and they're not always very polite. So you're constantly trying to coach, listening skills and communication skills. So again, students do not pay attention to others. Students reject alternative suggestions without justification. That means, they're hearing from their peers in this group project or this group work, suggestions for how to do something, or suggestions for how something might have worked out a certain way, and without even just turning down another student's ideas, without hearing them out, and without having their own reason for not hearing them out, just no, and moving on. That's not very collaborative. So these are some of the students' concerns that, yeah, as a classroom teacher, I've seen that happen, especially in my earlier years teaching. Now, the general concerns that are addressed in this article, again, this is the 2018 article, Perceived Obstacles for Student Collaboration. There's 4 very specific things that are addressed. The first one is a lack of collaborative skills, and we've kind of mentioned that a little bit, where the students just don't know how to communicate and how to listen, and how to work together, and the teachers, their capacity, they have the ability to coach students in these skills, but their capacity depends on the materials they have, the coaching that they've received, and the willingness of their administration to support the the learning curve that will inevitably take place when introducing this for the first time. The second general obstacle for collaborative learning practices is free writing. That's a huge problem in group works. And having been a student myself growing up, yeah, there's always that one kid who has to do all the work because their grade depends on the project getting done, not on the actual collaborative capacity of the teammates. And so you got 3 other people in that group who aren't really pulling their weight. Well, that leaves that one student who really wants the grade to do all the work, and the other 3 get a free ride. And so that's another common obstacle. The third obstacle, general concern, has to do with a competence status. And what how this article describes competence status is it gets into self-efficacy, self-confidence, and developing in students and teachers a self-awareness for how to self-manage the work that needs to get done to achieve a particular goal, a shared goal. And so the competence status, that does play a role. And so that's a really interesting perspective, or an interesting point of the article. And the last one is friendship, and that's the personal relationships of the students. And I would expand that to the teacher-student relationship, whether or not the teacher is the person who is simply giving the directions and expecting the right answer, or whether they are a facilitator on the side, helping the groups to learn how to work together. That's not a friendship, but it is a relationship that needs to be developed. So those concerns lead this article to 3 very specific suggestions for collaborative practices. So the first one, this article really gets into talking about how the course goals are so often just dripping with expectations for the actual points of the assignments and the academic expectations, right? But in order to pass the class, you don't really need to collaborate. And so because students know that, because the teachers know that, because the parents know that, the demand for developing collaborative learning skills just isn't there. The students will inherently ask, what is this worth? How many points is this? Is this going to be on the test? Do I need to do this? Do I need to work with the group in order to pass this class? And because the course goals have not integrated collaborative learning goals and capacities and skills and concepts, then yeah, course credit depends on the academic achievement, not on the collaborative learning capacities. So redefine your course. And this is especially true for high school, to some extent middle school, but as you get lower into the grade levels and the ages, there's the expectations, they're different from 5-year-olds to 10-year-olds to 15-year-olds. You know what I mean? So, and that's a conversation that I'd like to have with more teachers. But redefining the course goals to incorporate and integrate collaborative learning expectations, so that your class isn't just about learning multiplication, getting through the math standards, being able to write a 5-paragraph essay, understanding all of the academic standards. Yes, those are part of the course. In order to get course credit, you must do these things. But this course is designed around specific skill sets that require collaborative learning, and not for every assignment, but the collaborative learning skills will be instructed and assessed in order for academic expectations to be met. So that kind of integration is a practice that needs to happen, and it has to be a conversation that happens before the school year starts. If the school year has started, you can still make this shift. You just have to account for the fact that the students who will appreciate this shift are going to benefit, and the students who are going to fight tooth and nail and just want to do the independent work, you might have to allow for that as you practice this year, with this shift, integrating these kinds of collaborative learning practices that we'll talk a little bit in the next article. But you're going to have to practice this year so that you can prepare the discussions next summer for the next school year. So it's all part of a process. So that's the first practice. The second collaborative learning practice that they suggest in this article, in this study, has to do with designing a course syllabus to require collaborative learning skills. So it's not just the goals to require collaborative learning concepts and skills to be instructed and assessed as part of the course goals, but in your syllabus, be explicit about which concepts and skills related to collaborative learning are going to be instructed and assessed. So that, again, you can practice this year doing research, looking up articles, doing the work to associate the practices with the things you're already doing. Celebrate what you're already doing well, and really look into the things that are going to help you improve. But making sure that you're explicit in your syllabus next year, that's going to be without telling you exactly what those practices are, that's all you can say about this practice. So let's move on. Now, the third practice they suggest is addressing teacher bias toward doubtful trustworthiness of peer and self-assessments by students. And there are two particular books by one author that I would definitely recommend anybody read. The first one is Peer Feedback in the Classroom. It's written by Star Saxton, and she's an incredible educator who has written several books and is sort of leading the charge in, she's definitely one of the people who are leading the charge in what's called hacking assessments and hacking grading, and rethinking how grading and assessments happen in the classroom so that students take more ownership of their learning. And so she's incredible. Definitely look her up. But there are books like this, and another one that she wrote, teaching students to self-assess. It's a tiny little book, but it's jam-packed with all kinds of stuff that honestly I didn't even need to, I just got things underlined and circled in here because I didn't need the tabs. Incredible insights into how to help students reflect on their own learning. And so this this collaborative learning practice of addressing our own bias as educators about how we feel, how we perceive, how we trust our students to assess themselves. It really gets down to, for me in my self-directed learning classroom, it really gets down to, do the students know that how these skills and concepts build from last year and are going to prepare them for next year? And if they understand the progressions across grade levels, then they will understand that self-assessing themselves and just giving them A's, even though they didn't learn it, is going to set them up for a harder year next year. I cannot express how surprised I was when I started to trust my students in self-assessing and peer assessing. They want to succeed. They're not showing up to fail. They want to do well. They want to help each other. They want to help themselves. They really do. But in a system that doesn't coach them on how to do that, well, they're not that interested in trying. So, getting at your own biases toward trust in the students, knowing that they're going to have their good days and their bad, just like we do as adults. They're people, and they can assess themselves and be coached to learn how to learn, essentially. So collaborative learning, these are suggested practices from these authors in 2018. You can look this up and read the article yourself. I was able to find this article online and read it without a paywall, so you can find this. Let's see. Next article. The next article in 1988 is just a chapter in a book, and it's all about collaboration in the writing process. So these are English language arts teachers that are talking. And what happens is when students are expected to write an essay, they're assigned something, and maybe they're expected to use a writing process where they draft and revise and edit and publish. A lot of it is very independent. Everybody gets the prompt and everybody writes their own paper. Well, what this chapter really impresses upon is the idea that I kind of pulled a couple of lines here is the group process. The whole process of working with a group, it's a life process. And there are so many examples that this chapter gives where we are so often expected to work with a group. We're so often living under policies and rules and decisions that were made by committee that with that, you go to any school board meeting, you go to any board of directors, and you have organizations being run by groups. The group process for decision making, it's just part of life. And so this teacher writing this chapter is really impressing upon the point that the group process has to be taught. And I think they give the example of the school board meeting, where if you go to a school board meeting, you'll see not everyone has been taught. And it's snarky, it's a little sarcastic, but he's trying to make a point that just because individuals are put into a circle to work as a group, it does not mean that they're going to know inherently, automatically, how to communicate with each other. And I think that's really the point here is listening and communication are teachable skills. So students won't learn good group skills without specific structured instruction and training. I happen to agree, but something that isn't said here, the focus here is on direct instruction of collaborative learning. What you're going to find is it isn't so much sit down and listen to me on how to be collaborative. What the structured instruction and training is collaborative, is a process of letting go and giving students that ownership. So in the drafting process, this teacher gives an example of using a discussion test where you get groups of 4 to 7 who respond to the prompt that you were going to give the class anyway. These little groups of students, they draft a response together. And will you have some degree of free writing? Maybe. But in the process of introducing this group drafting assignment, you can focus on coaching them on how to discuss, on how to formulate, and how to reach a consensus. Those things aren't often instructed and taught explicitly. So this is an opportunity to do that. Are they all going to master it the first time you do it? No. The point here is that you give students that opportunity to work as a group to draft, knowing that the draft isn't the final product, and they're not going to get a grade on it, but it is going to be a necessary part of the writing process for the highest quality work. So then you get into the revision. Now, how do we use group work with revision in the second of 4 steps? Well, revision groups, instead of just asking a group to look at each other's paper and make suggestions, you have to give them very specific tasks, and you give them a time limit to accomplish these tasks. to look for very specific things. Are all of the periods in the right place? Read out loud to each other, and does each phrase end where it needs to end, and is there a period? For the younger students, or maybe the remedial older students, that's a great place to start. So you can have groups work on these very specific tasks. This is a collaborative practice, learning practice that can be taught in the writing process. Now you look at editing. Editing, very much the same thing. Actually, the example I just gave was more specific to editing with regards to phrasing and punctuation. So I suppose revising, considering the phrasing, and is that how you would say that sentence, that statement? Is there a detail that's missing? Can you focus on that one specific thing? Does every sentence have an adjective? Does every sentence have a noun and a verb? Is the subject and is there the subject, verb, and the antecedents and all of those things? Are those addressed in the revision and the editing? So you give groups very specific tasks, and within certain time limits. You don't give them a 15-minute period to check the periods, check particular punctuation. You give them time limits to check things as best they can, and you move on. So I like this aspect of group work in the writing process. Now, when it comes to publishing, there we go. Publishing is, this teacher argues in the chapter, publishing is so often an independent task where the student takes all of these suggestions, all of the revisions, all of the edits, and then just sits down, types it out by themselves, and turns it in. That was it. They did all the work. Now they just have to do this one last thing and submit it in paper, often, printed from a computer or something. And nowadays, submitted online via Google Doc or whatever. So what this teacher in this chapter argues for is the concept of publishing is any task beyond the draft, revision, edit steps. Once you get to that editing phase, once you're done editing, anything you do is part of the publishing process. And I think that's a really important takeaway, because that's where you can start to integrate group collaborative tasks and practices. So they're saying if the prompts for different groups ended up being similar to a topic, or if students were allowed to take a topic and make it their own, then they can create anthologies about a topic where different perspectives are taken and put together to be submitted as a product, right? And so student magazines, student anthologies, sharing and presenting your writing and actually reading it out loud to somebody is a practice that you can teach students and have them recognize that that is an excellent way to check their writing. So these are just a couple of group collaborative practices that address this publishing part of the writing process before they finally turn something in, if that's required. Because ultimately you can just, once all of the ideas are revised and edited, you can just as easily have a student, do a news television video where they just sort of read whatever it is that they had worked so hard to do, and have that be the presentation, So anyway, it's just a really fascinating look at collaborative learning practices in the classroom. And, that's specific to the writing process. Math classes, there are practices that are specific to math. Science, yes, there's lots of collaborative learning in science. History, surprisingly, yeah, there's just as much. I mean, language arts, history, social sciences, those overlap so much that this writing process can apply to a history or a social science class, just the same. So without anybody else in here talking through this with me and giving examples of their own, I'm going to kind of just cut it here. But if there were others who were adding Post-its to this conversation, I would have taken those Post-its and brought it down here to consider how easy would it be to implement some of the practices that would come about through discussion, and what potential for improving student learning would each of these, the practices that would come from this discussion have. And so that would be a fantastic second half. You know what I mean? Because this has been 30 minutes? Perfect. Yeah, 30 minutes and 36 seconds. Another 30 minutes on how specific practices can be implemented, the benefit versus the difficulty, and really taking a look at which practices you might be able to adopt and adapt into your own classroom. So, I'll probably do, hopefully, another one of these soon. If you would like to meet with me about collaborative learning practices, or if you want to do another live feed like this with a couple other people, reach out to me. Go visit my website at exploringthecore.com, and you can reach out to me via Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, even on this YouTube channel. Otherwise, I hope you got something out of this, and I hope you rewind to look up the sources of those 2 articles and read them. They're fascinating. There's so much more out there. And with that, I will say adios.